The silent grace of Evelyn Monroe. The sun had just begun to dip below the skyline, casting warm, golden hues over the towering buildings of Manhattan. It was a radiant, late autumn evening, and the city hummed with life, a rhythm that Evelyn Monroe knew all too well. At 73, Evelyn had spent her life navigating spaces that didn't always welcome her, yet she had become a master at moving through them with poise and grace. Evelyn approached the entrance of Eclat, an exclusive fine dining restaurant recently celebrated as a new Manhattan gem. Tonight, she wore a burgundy dress that shimmered softly in the evening light, complemented by a pair of simple gold earrings and a delicate bracelet. Her dark hair was swept back, revealing her high cheekbones and the lines of wisdom etched across her face. Her presence was striking, but her demeanor was warm, grounded, and effortlessly dignified. As she reached the door, she noticed her reflection in the polished glass. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight of herself in this place, a space where others might question her presence. Gathering herself, she stepped forward, nodding politely at the hostess, Lauren. Lauren, dressed immaculately in Eclat's signature black and silver attire, glanced at Evelyn with a practiced smile, though there was a slight narrowing of her eyes. The gesture was subtle, but Evelyn noticed. "Good evening, Ma'am," Lauren said, glancing briefly down at her list. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Monroe," Evelyn replied, her voice calm but firm. Lauren scanned the list, her expression revealing a slight hint of surprise. "Yes, of course," she said quickly, regaining her composure. "Please, right this way." The restaurant was everything the reviews had promised. A symphony of elegance with chandeliers glistening overhead, their crystal prisms casting a soft glow across tables adorned with fine linens and polished silverware. The muted tones of the decor combined with the soft hum of quiet conversation created an atmosphere that felt carefully curated, as if each patron had been handpicked. Lauren led Evelyn through the room, and as they passed tables, she noticed the subtle glances and quick, whispered exchanges. Some of the patrons wore curious expressions, others seemed vaguely disapproving, yet Evelyn maintained her poise, her steps measured, her eyes steady. She had long since mastered the art of ignoring such gazes. They arrived at a table near the center of the room, and as Evelyn settled into her seat, a young woman in her early 30s with blonde hair pulled back into a sleek bun approached her table. She wore a reserved smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The name tag on her crisp white blouse read Jessica. "Good evening," Jessica greeted her tone polite but cold. "May I start you with a glass of water, or perhaps something from our wine selection?" Evelyn smiled, her voice warm. "Yes, a glass of your Chardonnay, please." Jessica nodded curtly, not making eye contact, and turned away, moving quickly to a neighboring table where a young couple sat, laughing and glancing around the restaurant with ease. Her demeanor changed instantly. She greeted them with a genuine smile, exuding warmth as she described the night's specials. Watching from his vantage point in the corner, Samuel Monroe felt his heart tighten. Samuel had arrived at the restaurant earlier, choosing a discreet table partially concealed by an elaborate floral arrangement. At 47, Samuel was a force in the hospitality industry, known for his astute business acumen and dedication to creating welcoming spaces. He had acquired Eclat only a few months prior, and tonight was his first opportunity to observe its ambience and service without being recognized. He had invited his mother, Evelyn, to dine there, without revealing his presence. He wanted to see, firsthand, how his staff treated their patrons, especially those who, like his mother, might not fit the typical profile of Eclat's usual clientele. From the moment Evelyn walked in, Samuel had sensed the unspoken tension that lingered around her. He watched now as Jessica returned to his mother's table, her expression cool and detached. With a glass of wine she placed hastily in front of Evelyn. "Here's your wine," she said in a tone that barely masked her impatience. Evelyn took a sip, her face giving away nothing, though she immediately recognized the taste of a different wine. Setting the glass down, She looked up at Jessica with gentle patience. "I believe I ordered the Chardonnay," she said politely. Jessica's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Annoyance, perhaps, before she forced a smile. "Oh, I must have misheard," she replied, though Samuel, watching closely, noticed the slight smirk she tried to hide. "I'll get that for you right away." As she walked back toward the bar, her steps quick and stiff, Samuel could see the quiet storm brewing within him intensify. He had witnessed variations of this scene far too often in his life. A slight shift in service, a dismissive attitude, a poorly concealed assumption. Tonight, though, witnessing it directed at his mother, the slight stung sharper than ever. Jessica returned with the correct wine, but made no effort to apologize, instead moving on with a clipped tone to recite the specials in a hurried, almost monotonous way, as if she were reading a grocery list. "We have a truffle risotto, grilled Chilean sea bass, and a lamb shoulder. Each comes with seasonal sides," she rattled off. "Anything catch your eye?" "Yes," Evelyn replied, unfazed by Jessica's demeanor. "I'd like to try the sea bass, please." Jessica merely nodded, jotting it down with a slight roll of her eyes. She disappeared quickly, her steps lighter as she moved on to another table, her demeanor transforming once again into one of pleasant attentiveness. Samuel's jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold. He had known his mother would encounter such treatment, yet seeing it in his own establishment was a wound deeper than he had anticipated. As a boy, he'd watched her face such moments with dignity, teaching him by example the strength of quiet resilience. But tonight, as her son and the owner of this restaurant, he felt a protective anger he couldn't ignore. This wasn't the end of it. Tonight would be a reckoning, Samuel decided silently. He would see this play out, observe Jessica's true character, and ensure that any lessons would be remembered. A quiet test of dignity. As Evelyn sat alone in her chair, she gazed at her surroundings with quiet composure. Éclat was indeed beautiful, with its shimmering chandeliers, elegant artwork, and luxuriously draped windows that framed the Manhattan skyline. This was a place designed to impress, where even the light was dimmed just enough to create an aura of exclusivity. Every detail seemed crafted to remind its patrons of their status in society, a concept Evelyn found both fascinating and a little absurd. After all, what did luxury mean if it came at the expense of common kindness? The soft hum of conversation around her was punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the occasional ripple of laughter. Yet Evelyn felt a clear separation between herself and the others in the room. It was as though a subtle barrier existed, one that years of life experience had taught her was invisible but real. She sensed it in the way other diners looked past her, their eyes skimming over her without truly seeing her. Jessica returned, her professional mask in place, but her tone carried a palpable impatience as she set down the appetizer. A small plate of delicate smoked salmon and creme fraiche on a crisp, thin cracker. "Your starter," Jessica announced coolly, avoiding eye contact as she adjusted the plate with a small flourish that seemed more performative than considerate. "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice as serene as ever. Jessica offered only a slight nod before turning to leave, already focused on her next table. Evelyn began her meal with grace, taking her time with each bite. She let the flavors settle, her thoughts drifting back to her late husband, John, and their early years together. They had faced so many challenges, each one strengthening their bond. John had been a man who understood dignity, a quality he'd instilled in Samuel with care and patience. From his corner table, Samuel watched closely, noting how his mother maintained her composure, even as Jessica's dismissive behavior grew more apparent. He felt a rush of gratitude and pride, but also a simmering anger. His mother's quiet strength was remarkable, yes, but why should she have to endure such treatment? Tonight, he wasn't just observing as a son. He was here as the owner of Éclat, a place where he had vowed to create an atmosphere of equality and respect, and what he was witnessing contradicted everything he believed in. The minutes ticked by, and Samuel observed how Jessica continued to handle his mother's table with an indifference that bordered on disdain. When Evelyn finished her appetizer, Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Samuel watched as Evelyn sat, calm and unbothered, her posture graceful as she gazed around the room. She seemed to sense her son's presence, but did not look in his direction. Instead, she waited, exuding the kind of quiet confidence that made Samuel's chest swell with admiration. Still, the anger remained, simmering beneath the surface. Finally, Jessica returned, carrying Evelyn's entree, a beautifully plated dish of grilled Chilean sea bass on a bed of roasted heirloom vegetables, drizzled with a lemon basil sauce. Without a word, she set the plate down and started to turn away. Evelyn, maintaining her polite demeanor, gently called, "Excuse me, Jessica." Jessica paused, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "Yes. Could I please have a glass of water with lemon?" Evelyn asked, her tone warm, as though addressing an old friend rather than a waitress who had treated her with clear disdain. Jessica's lips thinned as she replied, "I'll see what I can do," and walked away briskly, without so much as a backward glance. Samuel watched, his frustration mounting. Jessica's actions were no accident. Her behavior was an unmistakable expression of her assumptions, a series of small indignities crafted to signal her disdain. These weren't overt acts of aggression. They were subtler, small, almost invisible slights designed to make a person feel unwelcome. Yet he noticed each one with painful clarity. Jessica returned a few moments later, setting down a glass of water. She had purposefully left out the lemon. "Thank you," Evelyn said softly, as though she hadn't noticed. But Samuel knew she had. His mother saw everything. Just as Jessica turned to leave, a man approached her, Charles, the sommelier. With his sharp suit, slicked back hair, and easy charm, Charles was a staple of Eclat, known for his vast knowledge of wines and his attentiveness to patrons. Samuel watched as Jessica's face softened, a warm smile emerging as she greeted him. Their interaction was filled with an ease and friendliness that Jessica had noticeably withheld from his mother. Evelyn took a sip of her water, her expression calm, though Samuel could see the faintest hint of disappointment flicker across her face. She turned her gaze toward the window, taking in the city lights, as though distancing herself from the quiet indignities she had faced since stepping foot in Eclat. And Samuel knew that this wasn't new to her. This was something she had faced all her life. Samuel's mind drifted back to his childhood, to memories of his mother teaching him the importance of respect, of treating every person with kindness regardless of their status. "People may try to diminish you, Samuel," she'd often say, "but their attempts say more about them than they do about you. Hold your head high and remember who you are." Now, as a man who had worked his way up to success, those words resonated more deeply than ever. He wasn't just a son here tonight. He was a witness to an injustice that he had the power to address. He felt a fierce determination building within him. He would let this play out, but only so far. His patience had its limits. Jessica returned to Evelyn's table once again, this time with a false, professional smile plastered across her face. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" she asked, her tone still holding that familiar edge. Evelyn looked up at her, her expression calm but with a touch of sadness in her eyes. "It's fine, thank you," she replied, choosing not to confront Jessica on her rudeness. Jessica gave a shallow nod and turned her attention to the next table, where a couple in designer attire sat chatting. Her demeanor transformed again, as she gushed over the wine pairing and offered the couple suggestions with enthusiasm and warmth. Samuel's jaw clenched as he observed this stark contrast in behavior. At that moment, another figure entered the restaurant, capturing Samuel's attention. Leonard, the restaurant's manager, walked with his usual air of authority, surveying the dining room with an approving smile. His tailored suit and crisp demeanor commanded respect. But Samuel knew that Leonard's professionalism often masked a more calculated approach. Leonard's presence reminded Samuel of the systemic biases that could thrive even in the most luxurious spaces. Jessica approached Leonard, a hint of nervousness in her expression as she whispered something in his ear, glancing over her shoulder in Evelyn's direction. Leonard's gaze flickered to Evelyn briefly, his face betraying a momentary hint of discomfort. Then, brushing it off, he nodded in silent agreement with Jessica, dismissing her concerns with a casual wave. Samuel felt a spark of anger flare within him. Leonard's reaction made it clear that he too had made assumptions about Evelyn, and he chose to support Jessica's prejudices rather than challenge them. Watching them from his hidden vantage, Samuel made a mental note. There would be a reckoning, not just for Jessica but for Leonard as well. Leonard continued his rounds, stopping occasionally to chat with diners who greeted him with friendly smiles. Samuel noticed how his demeanor shifted depending on the patrons, warm and engaged with certain tables, reserved and curt with others. His gaze never returned to Evelyn's table, as though he was purposefully ignoring her presence. It was the kind of exclusion that felt deliberate, designed to make someone feel invisible. Evelyn, ever composed, began to eat her main course. She handled each forkful with a grace that only deepened Samuel's admiration for her. He watched as she paused to savor each bite, never allowing the prejudice surrounding her to taint her enjoyment of the meal. His mother had always carried herself this way, with a kind of quiet dignity that demanded respect without ever asking for it. And as he continued to observe, Samuel felt his patience finally reach its limit. He rose from his seat, adjusting his suit jacket and smoothing his shirt with a steady hand. His steps were deliberate as he moved across the restaurant, his face set in a calm but resolute expression. Jessica, now back at her station, noticed him approaching and seemed momentarily taken aback, her polite smile faltering as she recognized him. She straightened, her expression a mask of practiced professionalism. "Mr. Monroe," she stammered, caught off guard by his approach. She glanced toward Leonard, who was too engaged in conversation with another guest to notice. Samuel nodded, a polite but cold smile on his lips. "Jessica, may I have a word with you? And please, ask Leonard to join us as well." Jessica's face went pale, her eyes darting nervously between Samuel and Leonard, who finally noticed them and began making his way over, his expression one of forced composure. Once the three of them were gathered in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Samuel took a deep breath, his voice calm but carrying a weight of authority that left no room for defiance. "I've been observing tonight's service, and I have several concerns that we need to address," Samuel began, his gaze steady and unyielding as he looked from Jessica to Leonard. "It appears that certain patrons are being treated with a distinct lack of respect, a fact that I find deeply disturbing." Leonard cleared his throat, an attempt to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Monroe, I assure you, we strive to provide excellent service to all our patrons." Samuel's gaze hardened. "Do you really? Because what I've witnessed tonight suggests otherwise." Jessica's hands shook slightly as she fumbled with her notepad, unable to meet Samuel's gaze. Samuel's voice lowered, but the intensity of his words cut through the room like a blade. "In this establishment, every guest is to be treated with respect, no exceptions. I hope that's understood, because the culture here will change, starting tonight." With that, Samuel turned, leaving them both standing in stunned silence as he walked back to his table. But his attention was now fully on his mother, who sat, as always, in quiet dignity, unaware of the storm brewing behind her. The reckoning begins. Evelyn took another sip of her wine, her gaze gentle and contemplative. She knew her son well enough to sense when something weighed on him, and she suspected he was here tonight, not just to observe, but to test the principles he had built his success upon. Samuel had never been one to tolerate unfairness. She had taught him that. She had shown him, through her own trials, that dignity was a power in itself, a quiet strength that could challenge assumptions and break down barriers. Jessica returned to Evelyn's table, her smile a little tighter than before. It was clear that Samuel's quiet reprimand had unsettled her. Still, She masked her discomfort with a professional veneer as she cleared the appetizer plate and offered the dessert menu. "Would you like to see our dessert options, ma'am?" she asked, her voice softer, but still laced with an undertone of impatience. Evelyn looked up with a serene smile. "Yes, please. That would be lovely." Jessica handed her the menu with a tense smile and stepped back, watching as Evelyn scanned the options. "Do you have a recommendation?" Evelyn inquired politely, looking up from the menu. Jessica hesitated, a hint of hesitation flickering in her eyes, as though she wasn't accustomed to engaging on such terms. She gestured half-heartedly toward the menu. "The souffle is a popular choice." "Thank you," Evelyn replied, her tone gracious, her eyes steady. "I'll have that, then." Jessica nodded, her fingers nervously gripping her notepad. She looked ready to say something, but held back and walked away quickly, disappearing into the kitchen. Samuel, from his table, noticed how the entire staff seemed subtly more tense after his conversation with Jessica and Leonard. He could feel the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere, the way conversations among staff grew quieter. Glances were exchanged, and eyes lingered a little longer on Evelyn's table. He understood that his intervention had sent a signal, one that disrupted the restaurant's usual rhythms and unearthed a discomfort that many had likely preferred to ignore. Leonard, visibly uneasy, circled the dining room, his sharp gaze occasionally falling on Evelyn. He was a man who prided himself on his authority, and Samuel knew that he must feel challenged by the unexpected scrutiny. Leonard paused by the bar, casting a wary glance toward the kitchen, where Jessica was preparing the dessert order. He seemed conflicted, unsure whether to address the tension or allow it to settle. Jessica returned with Evelyn's dessert, carefully placing the delicate souffle in front of her with a shaky hand. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed, but the strain was evident. She forced a smile as she stepped back, her discomfort clear. Samuel observed, noting how her entire demeanor had shifted, and he wondered if she truly understood the consequences of her actions or simply feared reprisal. Evelyn took a small bite of the souffle, savoring it with an appreciative nod. "It's very good," she said, her tone gentle. Jessica's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of guilt. "Thank you," she murmured, almost reflexively, before quickly retreating. Evelyn set down her fork, watching as Jessica walked away, her expression thoughtful. It wasn't her nature to cause discomfort, but she recognized that tonight was a necessary confrontation. She had faced countless moments of discrimination in her life, some subtle, others overt. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had an advocate in her son, and she understood that this experience was about more than her alone. Samuel rose from his table, moving with purpose across the restaurant floor. He approached Leonard, who was hovering near the bar, and gestured for him to join him in a quiet corner. Leonard followed reluctantly, his posture tense, his face betraying a mix of frustration and confusion. "Leonard," Samuel began, his voice low but firm. "Do you know why I'm here tonight?" Leonard's eyes darted nervously. "Mr. Monroe, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "Had I known?" Samuel held up a hand, silencing him. "That's not what I asked. I'm here because I wanted to see, firsthand, how our staff treats every guest, regardless of who they are. I'm here because this restaurant stands for more than luxury. It stands for respect. But what I've seen tonight makes me question whether those values are actually upheld here." Leonard's face flushed, his carefully composed expression faltering. "Mr. Monroe, I assure you, we strive to provide the highest level of service." Samuel cut him off. "Do you? Because what I saw tonight was anything but that. I saw my mother treated with subtle disrespect, dismissed by your staff, overlooked by you, and made to feel as though she didn't belong here. This isn't the first time I've seen such behavior, but I expected better in my own establishment." Leonard swallowed, his discomfort visible as he grappled with the weight of Samuel's words. I didn't realize." "That's the problem," Samuel said, his tone steely. "You didn't realize. And that lack of awareness, that blind indifference, is exactly what allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. It's what perpetuates discrimination, subtle though it may be. Leonard's gaze dropped, his face a mask of reluctant acceptance. He had been confronted with a truth that was impossible to deny, a truth that forced him to confront his own complicity. Samuel's voice softened, but his resolve remained. This restaurant will be a place where every person is treated with respect and dignity. That is the standard we will uphold. If you or anyone else on the staff can't meet that standard, then I suggest you reconsider your role here. Leonard nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly as he absorbed the message. Samuel watched him for a moment longer, letting the weight of his words settle before turning back toward his mother's table. When he arrived, Evelyn looked up at him with a gentle smile, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "Finished with your meal, Mother?" he asked, his tone warm but respectful. "Yes," she replied, folding her hands gracefully in her lap. "It was quite lovely, Samuel." He offered her his arm, and together they walked toward the entrance, a silent but powerful message that resonated throughout the room. Staff members watched them with a mixture of respect and discomfort, the unspoken tension hanging in the air like a charge. Samuel felt their eyes on him, but he remained undeterred, his mother's hand resting on his arm as they made their way to the door. As they stepped outside, the crisp night air greeted them, carrying the faint sounds of the bustling city beyond. Samuel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity and purpose settle over him. He knew that the events of tonight had only begun to address the deeper issues within Éclat, but it was a start, a necessary and uncompromising start. Evelyn turned to him, her gaze steady and filled with pride. "You handled that beautifully, Samuel." He nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I learned from the best." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. "Your father would be so proud of you." They stood in silence for a moment, sharing a bond that went beyond words. Samuel knew that tonight's experience had left its mark, not just on the restaurant, but on him as well. He had confronted a reality he could no longer ignore, a reality that demanded change. As they made their way down the sidewalk, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would return to Éclat the next day, ready to implement the changes he knew were necessary. He would ensure that the culture of respect he had promised would become a reality, and he would make certain that every staff member understood that dignity was not optional, but an absolute requirement. A culture transformed. The next morning dawned over Manhattan, casting a warm glow on the city streets. Samuel arrived at Éclat early, his footsteps echoing through the empty dining room as he took in the silence of the space. He had spent the night thinking about the incident, about his mother's unwavering dignity, and about the change he was determined to implement. Today was the beginning of a transformation that would challenge Éclat's very foundation, stripping away assumptions and rebuilding a culture rooted in respect. The staff meeting had been scheduled for 8 a.m., an hour before the restaurant opened, ensuring that everyone would be present. Samuel knew it would be a difficult conversation, one that would likely be met with resistance. But he was resolute. This was his establishment, and he would not allow prejudice to be a part of it. As the staff trickled in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease, Samuel watched them, noting the subtle hierarchy that had developed among them. Leonard entered, his gaze avoiding Samuel's, while Jessica walked in behind him, her face tight with nerves. The rest of the team, servers, bartenders, hosts, and kitchen staff, took their seats quietly, exchanging curious glances as they settled in. Word had spread that the owner would be addressing them, and there was an air of tension that thickened as they waited. Once everyone was seated, Samuel stepped to the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering for a moment on Leonard and Jessica before he began. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I want to thank you all for being here early. I know it's not easy to gather before a busy day, but today is important. I want to talk about an incident that occurred last night, a moment that revealed something about this establishment's culture that I cannot and will not accept. A few staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uneasy looks. Leonard's gaze remained downcast, his hands folded in his lap, while Jessica seemed to shrink into herself. I observed, firsthand, how a guest was treated with disrespect. And not just any guest, Samuel continued, his voice hardening slightly. That guest was my mother, but her identity doesn't matter in this context. What matters is that she, like every other guest, deserved respect, and that was not given. He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was palpable, filled with a mix of guilt and discomfort as the staff absorbed the weight of his statement. Éclat is a fine dining restaurant, he went on, and with that title comes a certain standard. But luxury means nothing if it's built on a foundation of prejudice. We are here to serve, yes, but more importantly, we are here to honor the dignity of every person who walks through our doors. From today onward, that will be the measure of success at Éclat, not the dollar amount on a check, but the quality of respect we show our guests. One of the younger servers, a woman named Maria who had joined Éclat only recently, raised her hand timidly. "Mr. Monroe," she began, her voice quiet, "are you saying that we'll be changing the way we approach service?" "Yes, Maria," Samuel replied, his tone softening. "We'll be changing not just our approach to service, but our entire culture. And it begins with each of you." Samuel gestured to Leonard, inviting him to stand beside him. Leonard's face was flushed, a mixture of guilt and uncertainty clouding his expression as he rose from his seat. "Leonard," Samuel addressed him, his voice carrying a firm edge, "you've been managing this establishment with a certain standard in mind, one that values high-spending patrons and overlooks those who don't fit a particular image. Would you agree?" Leonard hesitated, visibly struggling to find his words. Finally, he nodded, his gaze dropping. "Yes, sir," he replied quietly. "That approach is over," Samuel declared, his voice resolute. "From today onward, our primary focus is not the wealth or appearance of our guests. It is their dignity. Every single person who dines here is to be treated with the same level of respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Jessica's face had gone pale, her hands nervously twisting together in her lap. Samuel turned his attention to her, his gaze steady but without malice. "Jessica," he said, addressing her directly, "last night, your behavior was unacceptable. I'm giving you the opportunity to address that now. This isn't about punishment, it's about accountability. Do you understand what went wrong?" Jessica swallowed, her eyes darting around the room, before finally nodding. "Yes," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I made assumptions about your mother. I judged her, and I shouldn't have." "Thank you for acknowledging that," Samuel replied, his tone softened by a hint of understanding. "This is a lesson in humility for all of us, and I want you to understand, Jessica, that you're not alone in this. We all have biases, myself included, but it's our responsibility to confront them and ensure they do not impact our behavior." Jessica nodded, visibly relieved, though still shaken. Samuel could see that the weight of her actions had begun to sink in, and he hoped that this experience would serve as a turning point for her. "To make sure we're all on the same page," Samuel continued, addressing the entire staff, "I'll be implementing a series of mandatory training sessions on cultural competency, diversity, and respectful service. We'll be bringing in educators and civil rights advocates to help us reshape our approach, not just to service, but to human decency." He saw a few nods of understanding around the room, though some faces remained apprehensive. Change was never easy, especially in an industry where high standards and demanding clientele often bred arrogance and exclusivity. Maria, the new server, raised her hand again. "Mr. Monroe, will we have support during this transition?" "Yes, absolutely," Samuel replied, appreciating her initiative. "We're creating a support network within the staff, led by people you can trust, so that everyone feels comfortable expressing concerns. I want each of you to know that this isn't just an adjustment. It's a long-term commitment to a culture of respect and inclusivity. Leonard finally looked up, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work, Mr. Monroe. I didn't realize how ingrained some of these behaviors were until last night. Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of cautious hope. Good. I appreciate your willingness, Leonard. This is an opportunity for all of us to grow, to become better than we were yesterday. And that's something I value far more than perfection. The staff meeting continued as Samuel outlined the specifics of the new policies, revised service guidelines, customer feedback systems that emphasized fair treatment, and measures to ensure that everyone, from patrons to staff members, felt respected within the walls of Eclat. As the meeting wrapped up, Samuel could sense a renewed sense of purpose among the staff. It was as though a weight had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism, a shared understanding that they were embarking on a journey together, one that would reshape not just the restaurant, but themselves as individuals. After the staff had dispersed to prepare for the day's service, Samuel remained behind, lingering in the dining room. He looked around, taking in the familiar surroundings that, in many ways, felt new to him now. It was a space that held a multitude of possibilities, and he was determined to see those possibilities realized. Later that day, Evelyn entered Eclat, her graceful presence filling the room as she joined Samuel in the corner booth where he had watched her the night before. She looked around, a small smile on her lips as she observed the subtle changes in the staff's demeanor. Servers moved with a gentler attentiveness, greeting each guest warmly, their interactions marked by a newfound sense of respect and openness. "Things feel different already," Evelyn observed, her voice filled with quiet pride. Samuel nodded, his gaze following her line of sight. "It's a start," he replied. "There's still a lot to do, but I'm committed to making this change. I owe it to you, to everyone who's ever been treated as less than they deserve." Evelyn reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Samuel, this is more than just a change in policy. This is a transformation of values, a commitment to a world where respect isn't a luxury, but a right." Samuel felt a surge of gratitude as he looked at her, his mother, the woman who had taught him that true strength lay in quiet dignity, in the resilience to stand firm in one's beliefs without yielding to bitterness. The day unfolded with a new rhythm at Eclat, each guest greeted with equal warmth, each interaction marked by a heightened sense of purpose. The staff, though still adjusting, approached their roles with a renewed dedication, understanding that they were part of something greater than themselves. As the dinner service came to a close that evening, Samuel and Evelyn remained in the restaurant, watching the final patrons leave. There was a quiet satisfaction in the air, a shared sense of accomplishment that lingered long after the doors had closed. Samuel knew that there would be challenges ahead, that not everyone would embrace the change easily. But as he looked at his mother, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a conviction that went beyond profit or prestige. This was about creating a legacy, one that honored the dignity of every person, one that would stand as a testament to the power of integrity. Together, they left Eclat, stepping out into the crisp night air. The city lights sparkled around them, a symphony of hope and resilience, a reminder that true change always begins with a single act of courage, and that dignity, once claimed, could never be taken away. A test of change. The weeks following Samuel's mandate were some of the most challenging Eclat had ever seen. The transformation he demanded required every staff member to reevaluate not only their approach to service, but their own attitudes and assumptions. To reinforce these changes, Samuel introduced mandatory workshops, brought in cultural competency trainers, and held regular discussions led by social justice advocates. Each session was filled with open dialogue, uncomfortable realizations, and breakthroughs that, one by one, began to reshape Eclat's identity. Leonard, Eclat's manager, found himself particularly tested. He'd spent years climbing the ranks of the fine dining world, operating by standards that often valued exclusivity over inclusivity. Under Samuel's new direction, Leonard was tasked not only with enforcing these changes but embodying them. He was to be an example, a leader who demonstrated that respect wasn't reserved for guests with status, but was extended to everyone who walked through the door. It wasn't easy for him. In the first weeks of training, Leonard realized just how ingrained his own biases were, how many times he had dismissed patrons, staff members, even suppliers, based on assumptions rather than knowledge. He found himself questioning the very ethos that had defined his career. As part of his commitment to change, Leonard began conducting one-on-one conversations with each team member, checking in on their progress, listening to their concerns, and seeking out ways to support them. In one such conversation, he sat down with Maria, the young server who had been one of the first to express her apprehensions about the transition. Maria was thoughtful, careful with her words, as she described how the shift had affected her. "It's strange, Mr. Leonard," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "At first, I thought this was just about service, about how we talk to guests, how we handle orders. But now, I see it's more than that. It's about the way we see people, how we judge them without even realizing it." Leonard nodded, the truth of her words resonating with his own experience. "You're right, Maria. I've been doing this for so long. I didn't even realize how much of my thinking was rooted in these unspoken rules, rules that don't actually serve anyone. Changing that mindset, well, it's a journey." Maria's face softened, and she offered him a small smile. "We're all learning, I guess, but honestly, it's made me feel more connected to the guests. Like I'm not just here to serve a meal, but to actually see them, to understand them. It feels meaningful." That word, meaningful, stayed with Leonard long after their conversation ended. For years, his work had revolved around excellence in service, but this new dimension was something different. It challenged him, forced him to think deeper, and in a way, it gave him a renewed sense of purpose. It was no longer about simply managing a restaurant. It was about creating a place where every person felt they belonged. Jessica, the waitress who had been the catalyst for this transformation, was perhaps the most deeply affected by the change. For the first few weeks, she carried a noticeable tension, her interactions with guests marked by an anxiety that hadn't been there before. The memory of her treatment of Evelyn lingered in her mind, reminding her that her actions had consequences. Though Samuel hadn't dismissed her, she knew she was being watched closely, held to a higher standard to ensure she was committed to the new direction. One afternoon, after an especially intense training session, Jessica stayed behind, gathering her things in silence as the other staff filtered out. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Evelyn standing there, her gaze calm but intent. Evelyn had been invited to lead several of the workshops, her presence serving as a powerful reminder of the dignity that Samuel wanted to cultivate within Eclat. "Jessica," Evelyn said, her voice soft, but carrying a weight that stopped Jessica in her tracks. "How are you managing with all these changes?" Jessica looked down, her fingers twisting nervously around the strap of her bag. It's been hard. I thought I knew what it meant to give good service, but now I see that I didn't really understand. I'm trying, though. I don't want to make anyone feel the way I made you feel." Evelyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Growth is rarely easy, Jessica. Confronting our own flaws, recognizing our mistakes, that's hard work, but it's also how we become better. And you're here, doing that work, which speaks to your character. Keep going." Jessica felt a surge of relief, her tension loosening as she met Evelyn's gaze. The quiet encouragement in Evelyn's words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that while she couldn't change the past, she could choose how to move forward. She watched as Evelyn walked away, her graceful presence leaving a lasting impression. That moment stayed with Jessica, becoming a point of motivation that carried her through the difficult days that followed. As the restaurant's culture began to shift, Samuel noticed subtle changes in the interactions between guests and staff. Conversations became more open, less scripted. Servers took the time to engage with patrons beyond taking orders, sharing genuine smiles and warm exchanges that made Eclat feel more welcoming. Even the kitchen staff, who rarely interacted directly with guests, found themselves drawn into the atmosphere of inclusivity, creating dishes with a renewed sense of pride and purpose. One evening, a man named Mr. Lawson, a regular patron known for his high standards and occasionally gruff demeanor, entered Eclat. Leonard noticed him and immediately felt a wave of anxiety. Mr. Lawson was the kind of guest who could make or break a server's night, often demanding an impeccable level of service that bordered on impossible. In the past, Leonard might have approached Mr. Lawson with a forced smile, hoping to appease him with extra attention and special treatment. This time, however, Leonard approached him differently, remembering Samuel's instruction to treat each guest with equal respect. He greeted Mr. Lawson warmly, without the usual airs or calculated charm, and seated him with a quiet dignity that seemed to disarm the older man. Maria was assigned to Mr. Lawson's table that evening, and she approached with a calm, confident smile. "Good evening, Mr. Lawson. It's nice to have you with us tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Mr. Lawson raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised by her easy manner, but he nodded, ordering a glass of red wine. As the evening progressed, Maria's interactions with Mr. Lawson remained unhurried and attentive, her approach genuine and friendly rather than overly formal. She engaged him in conversation, asking him about his favorite wines, his opinions on the dishes, and even sharing a small story about her own first encounter with fine dining. To Leonard's surprise, Mr. Lawson seemed to respond positively, his typical gruffness softening as he spoke with Maria. By the end of the meal, he was smiling, his usual critical tone replaced by a warmth Leonard hadn't seen before. As Mr. Lawson prepared to leave, he caught Leonard's eye and beckoned him over. "Leonard, you've got something good going on here," he said, his voice gruff but carrying a hint of approval. "This young lady," he gestured to Maria, "she made me feel like I was actually welcome here. That's rare." Leonard felt a swell of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. We're working to make Eclat a place where everyone feels that way." Mr. Lawson nodded, slipping a generous tip to Maria before he left. For the first time in his career, Leonard felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond a job well done. It was a satisfaction rooted in something deeper, something meaningful. Eclat had changed, and so had he. In the months that followed, word began to spread about the transformation within Eclat. Guests commented on the warmth of the staff, the attention to detail that went beyond presentation, and the sense of community that had begun to permeate the restaurant. Samuel implemented a customer feedback system that allowed patrons to share their experiences anonymously, providing an honest window into the impact of the changes. One comment that struck Samuel was from a woman named Mrs. Klein, who had visited Eclat for the first time since the transition. Her review read, "I felt something here tonight that I rarely feel in fine dining. Genuine warmth. Not just from the staff, but in the atmosphere itself. It's as though Eclat has found its heart." Reading those words, Samuel felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. He had always believed in creating spaces of beauty and sophistication, but he now understood that true success was not in exclusivity, but in inclusivity, in creating a space that welcomed everyone with open arms. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, Samuel gathered the staff together for a final reflection. He stood before them, his gaze filled with pride and gratitude. "I want to thank each of you," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "You took on a challenge that went beyond the usual demands of this industry. You faced your own biases, your own assumptions, and you worked to create a space that honors the dignity of every person who enters. That's a rare and beautiful thing, and I am grateful for each of you." The staff exchanged glances, smiles breaking out across their faces as they felt the impact of Samuel's words. They had become more than just a team. They had become a community, united by a commitment to respect and understanding. As the lights dimmed and the final guests departed, Samuel and Evelyn stood together, watching the staff share laughs and stories, a camaraderie that had grown from the difficult journey they had taken together. Evelyn looked at her son, pride shining in her eyes. "You've done something remarkable here, Samuel," she said softly. "You've shown them that dignity isn't just a word. It's a way of being." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Éclat had become more than a fine dining restaurant. It had become a place of connection, a place where every person, staff and guest alike, felt seen, valued, and respected. And in that transformation, Samuel knew they had created something far greater than a business. They had built a legacy, the legacy of dignity. 3 years after that pivotal night when Samuel Monroe witnessed his mother, Evelyn, endure quiet discrimination at Éclat, the restaurant was unrecognizable in the best possible way. Éclat was still a prestigious fine dining establishment, known for its impeccable cuisine and sophisticated ambience, but it had grown into something far more profound. Under Samuel's guidance and with the dedication of its staff, Éclat had become a beacon of inclusivity and respect, a place where every patron, regardless of background or status, felt genuinely welcomed and valued. Éclat's transformation had attracted attention from within the hospitality industry and beyond. Industry magazines had written articles praising its unique approach to fine dining, highlighting its commitment to fostering a culture of respect that elevated both service and community. Samuel had been invited to speak at conferences, his message resonating with restaurant owners, hotel managers, and hospitality professionals across the country. He shared Éclat's journey, discussing the challenges of confronting ingrained biases and the rewards of creating an environment that honored the dignity of every person. One morning, Samuel sat in his office, scrolling through emails when he came across a message from an unexpected sender, Jessica Stevens. Jessica had left Éclat a year earlier, her departure amicable yet tinged with the knowledge that her journey was one of personal growth as much as professional development. In her message, she described the profound impact her time at Éclat had on her life. "Dear Mr. Monroe," the message began, "I wanted to thank you for the opportunities you gave me during my time at Éclat. Working there taught me more than just the art of fine dining. It taught me about the importance of seeing people as they are, without assumptions. After leaving Éclat, I joined a smaller restaurant in Queens, where I've been implementing many of the values you instilled in us. The culture at Éclat showed me how service can be a force for connection and compassion, and I wanted you to know that I carry that lesson with me every day. Thank you." Reading Jessica's email, Samuel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had always hoped that the changes at Éclat would impact more than just the restaurant's bottom line. He wanted it to serve as a model for what the hospitality industry could be. Jessica's words confirmed that this transformation was spreading, reaching beyond Éclat's walls and into the world. Samuel forwarded the email to Evelyn, who often received updates on Éclat's progress. She responded within minutes, her message brief yet filled with pride. "You've done more than change a restaurant, Samuel. You've changed lives. I couldn't be prouder of you." Evelyn's words touched him deeply. She had always been his guiding light, the source of his inspiration, and to know that she felt pride in what he had accomplished was the ultimate validation. That afternoon, Samuel met with Leonard, who had now become not only a reliable manager, but a partner in Samuel's mission. Leonard's transformation was one of Éclat's greatest success stories. Once a man who believed in strict elitist standards of fine dining, he now led the team with a genuine commitment to inclusivity. Leonard had not only embraced the restaurant's new culture, but had also become a mentor to other hospitality professionals who visited Éclat, eager to learn from its example. "Samuel," Leonard said, sitting across from him in the office, "we've been receiving more requests from other restaurant managers and industry groups wanting to learn about what we're doing here. They're curious about our training programs, the way we handle guest relations, everything." Samuel nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the potential for Eclat's influence to reach even further. "It's incredible, Leonard," he replied, a note of pride in his voice. "When I started this journey, I never imagined Eclat would become a model for others. But now, it feels like there's a chance to do something bigger, to create a movement." Leonard's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Exactly. What if we took what we've done here and shared it on a larger scale? We could design workshops, offer consulting for other restaurants, maybe even create a program to certify establishments committed to a culture of dignity." Samuel felt a surge of excitement at Leonard's idea. It was bold, ambitious, and completely aligned with everything he had envisioned for Eclat. "I think it's time," he said, his voice carrying a sense of finality. "Let's create something lasting, a foundation that supports respect and dignity in the hospitality industry." Over the following months, Samuel and Leonard worked tirelessly to establish the Dignity in Service Foundation. They developed a program that trained restaurant and hotel staff in cultural sensitivity, customer engagement, and respectful service practices. They recruited industry experts, civil rights advocates, and hospitality veterans to serve as advisors, crafting a curriculum that combined practical skills with the deeper principles of empathy and inclusion. Word spread quickly, and soon, restaurants and hotels across the country were signing up to participate. Evelyn played a vital role in the Foundation's work. Her wisdom and experience became central to the Foundation's message, and she frequently spoke at seminars and workshops, sharing her story and the lessons she had learned over a lifetime of confronting prejudice with quiet resilience. Her presence became a source of inspiration, a living testament to the power of dignity in the face of adversity. One afternoon, as Samuel and Evelyn walked through Eclat together, a young couple approached them. The woman, smiling warmly, introduced herself as Rebecca, a manager at a new restaurant in Harlem that had recently undergone the Dignity in Service training. "Mr. Monroe, Ms. Monroe," Rebecca said, her voice filled with admiration, "I just wanted to say thank you. Our team has been transformed by the training. We're seeing a level of respect and connection with our guests that we never thought possible. Your foundation is doing incredible work." Evelyn smiled, her gaze warm as she nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Rebecca. It's a privilege to witness so many people embracing these values. Remember, it's not just about what you do, but how you make people feel. When you treat someone with dignity, you give them a sense of belonging." Rebecca's eyes glistened with appreciation as she nodded. "I'll remember that, Ms. Monroe. Thank you." As the couple departed, Samuel looked at his mother, feeling a surge of pride. She had become the heart of their mission, her unwavering grace serving as a guiding light for all who encountered her. The foundation continued to grow, reaching beyond the hospitality industry to partner with schools, community centers, and other public institutions. They established the Evelyn Monroe Fellowship, a scholarship for aspiring hospitality professionals from underserved backgrounds, helping them access the education and mentorship they needed to build successful careers. The fellowship became one of the Foundation's most cherished programs, giving back to communities that had often been marginalized and providing opportunities for the next generation. Evelyn was deeply moved by the fellowship named in her honor. She attended the award ceremonies each year, personally meeting the recipients and offering them words of encouragement. Her presence was a profound gift to each fellow, her legacy of dignity and strength inspiring them to carry her values into their own lives and careers. As Eclat continued to thrive, Samuel noticed that the restaurant had become a gathering place for diverse patrons from all walks of life. It was a place where people felt safe, seen, and respected. Regular patrons included students, families, artists, business professionals, and travelers, all sharing the same space, united by a common experience of warmth and inclusion. One evening, as Samuel observed the bustling dining room, he noticed a young woman seated alone, gazing around with an expression of awe. She was dressed simply, her clothes modest, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. Samuel felt a familiar pang of recognition. She reminded him of his mother, seated in that same room years ago, exuding dignity in the face of unspoken judgments. He approached her table, introducing himself with a warm smile. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Samuel Monroe, the owner. I hope you're enjoying your experience here." The young woman's face lit up with surprise. "Oh, Mr. Monroe, yes, it's wonderful here. I'd read about éclat and the values you uphold. It's even better than I imagined." Samuel smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the vision he had worked toward, a space where everyone, no matter their background, felt valued and welcomed. Before he left her table, the young woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe, for creating a place like this. I didn't think I'd ever feel comfortable in a place like éclat, but here I feel like I belong." Samuel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly what we're here for. Thank you for being part of this." As he walked away, he glanced back at the young woman, feeling the weight of his mother's legacy and the foundation they had built together. Éclat had become more than a restaurant. It was a place where people experienced not only fine cuisine, but the profound gift of respect. When Samuel returned to his office that night, he found Evelyn waiting for him, her expression calm and filled with pride. They sat together in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts, until Evelyn spoke. "You've built something truly beautiful here, Samuel. A place where people are seen for who they are, not who the world expects them to be." Samuel took her hand, feeling the warmth of her presence. "It's because of you, Mother. You taught me that dignity is the foundation of all good things. This is as much your legacy as it is mine." They sat together, mother and son, sharing the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled, knowing that their work had touched lives and would continue to inspire others long after they were gone. Outside, the lights of éclat glowed warmly, a testament to the power of dignity, resilience, and the quiet strength of one woman who had changed everything. And as guests continued to gather within its walls, they felt the impact of Samuel and Evelyn's journey, a legacy of respect, a celebration of humanity, and a reminder that true excellence lies in honoring the dignity of every soul who enters.